we'll get started. Again, thank you all for coming. We'll talk first through the welcome and the emblem and why the research group was started. And it mainly was started as an educator myself and as a midwife myself. It's recognising that students sometimes don't get that exposure to research until the third year, or you might be getting exposure but you haven't got that link to why it's important within your midwifery studies. So the research group with the emblem there with the tree of life, or some people relate it to, say, the placenta. It's all about recognising that you come into midwifery education and midwifery with your own experiences and your own backgrounds, and you've all got something to bring. And then the trunk is really looking at the experience that we give you as part of your training and how we expose you to different situations to perhaps get you to think differently or think of things from a different perspective, and recognise that research and evidence-based practice is a big part of what we do as student midwives and midwives. So it's really important that you start your midwifery education with an understanding of research, because to give informed consent to women, or to offer informed consent even, you will need to know the research base of what it is you're offering, so that you can tell them why certain choices might have benefits and risks. So absolutely, right from the beginning, if you're a first year student, if you're in practice at the moment, doing a session with your practice educator, as we've had for certain sessions, this is absolutely for you. And for the third years that are doing your research studies or your literature reviews, this is also useful as part of your program as well. And if you're an educator, midwifery educator, it's also useful for you, because there's activities with each of these sessions and they are recorded so that you can use them within your sessions or duplicate the activities. So we're very lucky today to be talking about building research in informed midwifery education. So I'm going to introduce you in a moment to Emily Bates, who is up for an award with the RCM for excellence in research. And what's great is she's a student midwife as well, and has recognised the importance of research as that platform in order to either have a voice to continue doing things that we are doing to show the evidence, but also to uphold the profession as well. So she'll be speaking with us in a moment, so she'll be able to introduce herself with a little bit more information too. But it's really useful to have her to come, and also for all universities to be involved within the research group, because then we can have this across each university and other university students and lecturers and professionals supporting and presenting. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So that's the outline for today. For the breakout room activity today, we're going to do a question that we're going to put into the chat shortly. So what I want you to do is to think of that question as we're going through, and as Emily's going through her research that she did, and just consider that, so that when it comes to the Q&A at the end and the feedback, you can give your point of view or experience at that point. Just a few reminders for house rules. So this is a non-judgmental environment. You are all student midwives or research midwives, apprenticeship midwives. So that should be part of who you are already, is to be non-judgmental, respecting each other's differences, and open to hearing other ideas and views, because that's what shapes our practice, isn't it? If we're open to others' ideas and views, it helps us to see things from different people's perspectives, and hopefully support research in the future and safe and effective practice. confidentiality as well. So when we're talking through the Q&A at the end, any identifying characteristics or anyone's views that is not recorded at that point. So Caroline does a lot of work to redact that at the end, so don't worry about that being in there. This can then be used as a resource to look back on as well. And also, for those of you that are joining from the first year, you may not know this already, or you may know it, but research forms part of the NMC code and what your programme is validated against. So you have, when you're looking at the NMC code and the NMC in general, validation for this course includes the standards and proficiencies. There is research included in there. So we do these sessions so that you have experience and exposure. So when you are talking to practice as well, once we do our evaluation at the end, you get a certificate. And with that certificate, you can show, well, actually, I've got some experience of discussing research, and perhaps we can talk about this a little bit more. Okay. So at this point, I am going to, you can have a pause from my voice, and I'm going to let Emily introduce herself and also talk about the research that she did on experiences of the birth requirements and its impact on women-centred care and mental health. So I am going to go quiet, and then Emily is going to start to present.
Hi everybody, my name is Emily Bates and I'm a third year midwifery student at the University of East Anglia. I am 1/3 of a team of 3 who put together this piece of research into the EU directed 40 birth requirement and its impact on women-centred care and on student mental health. I've never done anything like this before, so you might have to bear with me. So next slide, please. And the next one, please. So just to set the scene, I'll kind of do a bit of talking about how this all started, and then the research itself, and then where we've kind of gone with it. So to set the scene, it was November. I was on my first clinical placement, year 1, on delivery suite, and it was quiet. It was so quiet. I don't even think I saw a woman. And the third years had come back out, and we were starting to hear rumours of third years going into their last year with only 6 births, and people were talking about it, and I was starting to feel really worried. It just seemed impossible. I remember thinking like, oh, I have no idea how I'm going to achieve this by the end of my third year. And I started to notice that it was affecting my clinical decision making. So I would prioritise the opportunity to get the birth over the ability to provide women-centred care, continuity of care. And it was making me feel really uncomfortable because that wasn't the type of midwife that I wanted to be. But yeah, I found myself making these decisions. And it started to kind of raise important questions to me about how these long-standing educational requirements were interacting with student behaviour. So I wrote a reflection on it, and it started to become more obvious to me that this wasn't just my experience. It was starting to be reflected amongst like my student colleagues and kind of further afield. And it seemed very clear very quickly that something was causing this behaviour. And we were doing a lot of talking about it. Any opportunity that I had to talk about this, I was talking about it in the staff room, when I was at uni, when we were all on placement, and there's big groups of people, we were all talking about it, and it was becoming really, really overwhelming. And it got to that point where I thought, I need to channel this into something a little bit more meaningful because it was starting to feel quite stressful. So applying the principle that has been drilled into us from day one of the importance of an evidence base, we decided to put together a piece of research into how the 40 birth requirement affects women-centred care and student mental health. Next slide, please. So before we could understand whether or not this issue was local and personal, we needed to zoom out to see what the national picture was saying. So the NMC standards for pre-registration requirements for midwifery education require student midwives to personally conduct 40 vaginal births. Could you click for me again, Michelle, please? However, the total fertility rate in England and Wales has fallen to its lowest level on record at 1.44 children per woman. And in 2023, 49.4% of all births were vaginal births without the use of instruments. 1 in 4 women were having caesarean sections, and approximately 10 to 15% of women were giving birth by assisted vaginal delivery. Importantly, neither caesarean section or instrumental deliveries count towards the 40 birth requirements, even though they represent such a huge part of clinical practice. So when you bring all of these elements together, it was really showing a contradiction. That we're still expecting students to meet these standards in a maternity landscape which just doesn't seem to exist anymore. So having established the wider national context, we wanted to understand how these national trends were translating into students' experiences. So our methodology was designed to capture exactly that. We designed an exploratory descriptive study which focused specifically on student midwives' experiences of the 40 birth requirement. We used purposive sampling, and we invited all undergraduate midwifery students at one university in the east of England to take part, and we had set inclusion and exclusion criteria within that. Data was collected through an online anonymous survey, and we designed it specifically for this study. So we went with a survey because we felt that that would be the easiest way and the fastest way to get as much information as we could. Everybody seemed very busy at the time in terms of student workload, so we wanted to do something which was kind of minimal effort that we could get the maximum gain, I guess. It included mainly closed response questions, which we analysed descriptively, and then we had one free text question to gather a bit more of a richer insight, which was analysed thematically. We tried to use reflexive analysis throughout to acknowledge the student research perspective, and we gained ethical approval. It was all anonymous, and the survey was voluntary. Getting the ethics, we found the ethical approval, we found the hardest bit to do. It was such a massive document that we had to prepare. Having done it now, I think it would be a little bit easier, but that trying to anticipate what you think you might want when you've never done it before was quite tricky. But once we kind of got that moving, we had all of the research design, it flowed quite nicely. Next slide, please. So this methodology resulted in a strong data set. We had a total of 86 surveys which were analysed, and we had quite a relatively even distribution across all 3 cohorts. So there was about 145 students that kind of were in the pool, and we got 86 of those back, which was about a 65% response rate, which by all accounts is quite good for a survey. We thought that it was quite significant that each 3 cohorts had quite a nice distribution, which shows that it wasn't just a problem that people were finding in their 3rd year, it was across all 3 year groups. We conducted the study in July and towards the academic programme, and at the time of this study, fewer than half of the participants had facilitated 14 or more births, so it wasn't even evenly split there. Additionally, 40% reported working extra hours on top of the 2,320 to meet specifically the birth requirement, and 67.4% of participants did not feel that they had an appropriate number of births for their point in training. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the quantitative data, almost every student told us that the 40 birth requirement was dominating their conversations and reported feeling stressed by comparing birth numbers. They also reported feeling worried about how meeting the requirement would affect their ability to qualify, and a large majority described feeling in competition with their peers and said they were more likely to choose caring for a woman if a vaginal birth was anticipated, which suggests that the requirement is shaping behaviour in quite a direct way. And then when you looked at the mental health data, around 2/3 felt that the requirement had a negative impact on their mental well-being, and many reported feeling worried, stressed, burnt out or anxious, or even feeling like they'd let themselves down. So this isn't just about a target that's hard to reach, it's about how the target is shaping student experience, their emotional well-being, and how they navigate their learning and practice. Next slide, please. So alongside the quantitative data, we also asked students to share their experiences in their own words. This qualitative evidence offered essential context to the quantitative data, and it highlighted the complexity of this issue beyond the numerical trends. So the free text responses were really rich, and we had a total of 5,000 words in total. So what we did with these is we analysed them individually and we put them into different codes, and then we came together as a group to see how our codes compared. Using kind of self-reflection throughout to mitigate against bias. And we got 4 themes that emerged. So we had the competition, the requirement does not reflect the landscape, missed learning opportunities, and mental health. We noticed that all 4 of these themes were really intertwined, and they were kind of creating a cycle that was shaping students' practice experience. Next slide, please. So based on both the quantitative and the qualitative data, several discussion points emerged for us. Would you be able to click for me, Michelle? So participants described feeling intense pressure, and this pressure didn't just seem to make the experience challenging, it seemed to tap into something almost instinctive. Some participants reported modifying their behaviour to ensure that they secured a birth opportunity, reflecting a shift from the relational care to the task-orientated thinking. When opportunities are scarce, we would argue that students were beginning to operate under what might be described as a kind of survival mindset, where the primary goal was becoming to secure what is necessary to progress rather than engaging collaboratively or reflectively. We kind of we linked it into like Maslow's triangle of needs. So their bottom needs, they weren't feeling like were being met, so they were unable to kind of progress to that kind of gold standard, I guess. It was also worth commenting on how the data suggested that the high stakes atmosphere was shaping their relationship with their peers. So rather than fostering supportive peer relationships and shared learning, the competitive atmosphere, we would argue, was creating rivalry and tension within cohorts. It was reducing psychological safety and was compromising students' ability to focus on women-centred care. This kind of raised broader concerns about the culture within clinical learning environments. If competition becomes normalised as a response to structural pressures, there is a risk that students then can carry these behaviours into professional practice, and this not only has implications for student well-being, but also the quality of care, teamwork and ethical decision-making. Next slide, please. So another interesting discussion was the language that the students were using. If you could click for me again, Michelle, please. So words like struggle, fight and compete, we would argue that it reframes learning as an environment of like a battleground rather than a space of care. These terms were centering conflict and scarcity and personal gain, and in doing so were shifting attention away from the woman and her experience. This kind of language is not just descriptive, it's performative. It shapes how students were understanding their role and how they were relating to one another, and ultimately how they behave. When competition becomes normalised through everyday language, it positions birth as something to be won or secured. And in that framing, the woman is no longer the focus. She becomes the means to an end, a required number, an opportunity, a tick box. And this is where the dehumanisation was occurring. Next slide, please. So something else that was we felt was worth discussing was the impact of the 40 birth requirement on students' exposure to the full range of intrapartum care. Many students told us they were more likely to choose caring for a woman who was already assessed as low risk or where a straightforward birth seemed more likely. If you could click for me again, Michelle, please. But the unintended consequence is that students felt that they were missing out on essential learning. Several participants talked about feeling less confident in recognising when labour is deviating from normal or in managing situations that require escalation or intervention. And this is a key point. Being a competent midwife isn't just about supporting physiological birth, it's about recognising when things are not normal and responding appropriately. So if the structure of the requirement is funneling students towards only one type of clinical experience, we need to question whether it's inadvertently limiting their ability to develop these critical judgment and escalation skills that are so essential for safe practice. Next slide, please. So another discussion point was the impact of the 40 birth requirement on students' mental health and workforce retention. If you could click again for me, Michelle, please. Participants described feeling worried, anxious, stressed and burnt out, and in some cases it was from the very beginning of their training. Several even reported considering leaving the course altogether. And this is important because burnout doesn't just start on day one as a newly qualified midwife. For some, it is already forming during their training. And we were wondering what this would have on retention. So midwifery is already a profession facing significant workplace shortages, and if students enter the workforce already feeling depleted, or if some never make it to qualification because the emotional burden becomes too great, the implications extend far beyond individual well-being. It'll affect teams, services, and ultimately the quality of care that women receive. So we said that the issue extended beyond individual student wellbeing, and it reflected a structural concern with potential consequences for workforce stability and service provision. If the conditions of pre-registration education contribute to early fatigue or attrition, then the profession may face ongoing challenges in maintaining a healthy, confident and enduring workforce. Next slide, please. So all of this discussion pointed to several implications for practice. The findings of the study suggested a disconnect between current clinical realities and the rigid expectations that student midwives must personally facilitate 40 spontaneous vaginal births. And as vaginal birth rates continue to decline, this requirement creates undue competition among students and can compromise women-centred care, limit exposure to complex cases and negatively affect student wellbeing. So in practice, these findings suggest a need for education providers and regulatory bodies to reconsider whether fixed numerical requirements are the most appropriate means of assessing competence. Next slide, please. So we wanted to acknowledge the limitations of this study. We only did it at a single university, so it is relatively small, so the findings weren't necessarily generalisable. The university is also rural in location, so there are socio-economic and cultural factors which may be affected by this. And also the students were student researchers, so we were part of the study population. We did our best to reduce bias where we could, and were encouraged to reflect on our own experience and possible prejudice to kind of mitigate against this. Anecdotally, this is an experience that people are kind of finding not just in this area, but obviously we don't have the data to support that. Next slide, please. So although the study was small in scale, the impact of the work has already extended far beyond what we expected. So we presented elements of the study to a member of the midwifery education team at the university, where they're used to inform discussions around potential placement programme revisions. So I did like a formula when I wrote the reflection on kind of the average amount of babies that a student would expect to see over their year of training on the current placement intrapartum programme hours. And that has been used to guide conversations, and they've adjusted now the intrapartum hours, and that kind of demonstrated its practical influence. It's also been presented at the ICM Congress in 2024, so it's had international visibility. We have since submitted abstracts to the RCM, and the full manuscript has been published in the British Journal of Midwifery, ensuring peer-reviewed dissemination. Alongside this, we have engaged in dialogue with senior leaders at NHS England, the NMC and the RCM. I was invited to be on an expert advisory panel. It was a 4-nation panel, and they were looking to produce a report specifically about pre-registration requirements, which would be used to guide the NMC's key lines of inquiry. And it was really important that they had students there, because at one point they were talking about, well, we don't need to ask the first years their opinion because we don't want to stress them out. But having us there, we were able to say, well, no, because they're already, based on what we've done and the research that we've done, they are already feeling it, and they have an important voice in this conversation. So it's been used there. Recently, we've been able to discuss the work with a health minister who expressed genuine interest and recognised its relevance to the wider challenge of workforce sustainability. And we have been shortlisted for the RCM Excellence in Research Award, which is a win in itself, really. Like, we would have never expected it to have got this far. Next slide, please. So these are just our key points, really, to kind of summarise. So a decline in spontaneous vaginal deliveries creates practical challenges for student midwives, limiting their hands-on experience due to competition for fewer opportunities. Pressure to meet birth requirements may limit students' exposure to complex cases, hindering their ability to recognise deviations from what is considered normal. The stress associated with birth requirements can adversely affect mental well-being, leading to burnout and raising concerns about the retention of qualified midwives. And the persistent 40 birth requirement may impact women-centred care and student well-being, highlighting the need for further research on pre-registration requirements to foster healthy, competent professionals. Next slide, please. So this is just a quote that we felt really summed it up. When we did this piece of research, we never felt that this would solve anything. Like, we never ever believed that the NMC would read it and think, yeah, okay, we'll listen to you, Emily, you've solved it. But I think it's given us a really important voice in this conversation. Like, why should we not be actively involved in the education which shapes us? And that is probably kind of the takeaway point for why I think all students should be involved in research, really. Like, we deserve a seat at the table, and we owe it to the women to be part of that conversation as well. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
That is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Wow, I've actually lost for words for a lot of that you've actually presented, and the impact that you've actually had across midwifery as a whole, like globally as well. So ICM, and can definitely see why you were nominated for an award in excellence in research as well.